So hello everyone, I hope you can all hear me. This is Dara McCarthy here, broadcasting live on Instagram for Travel Curious. I'm a Travel Curious guide here in Dublin. I hope the sound quality is okay. You're greeting me here on a bright but blustery day in Dublin. As a result of that, I'm going to have to impersonate Bono from U2 and wear sunglasses for the duration of our short walking tour. I'm going to bring you on a short walk of my city for about 20 minutes. I'm going to fill you in on the key details of it and also deal with our rocky road to independence that took place 100 years ago. You're joining me here on the banks of the River Liffey. This is the main river here in Dublin, and Liffey is how the river is spelt. This originates in the southwest. It goes out behind me, which is eastwards towards England. This cuts the city of Dublin in two, and it's also responsible for the two names of this city. Dublin, the capital of the Irish Republic. This is not the original name for the site. The original name for the site is still recorded in the Irish or Gaelic name for this settlement, and that is Baile Átha Cliath. And this Baile was a settlement. Átha is a ford. It's a place in the river where it's low enough to cross, just behind me, and Cliath is wattles. So this was a large wooden bridge made out of wattles, saplings of tree, woven together, and this goes back, is the first recorded structure in this area, and it goes back to 770 AD, 1250 years ago. And this was the original name for the site, and it's still the Irish name for Dublin, the town near the ford of Wattles. The second name for the city I'll go through in a moment, Dublin, much easier to pronounce than Baile Átha Cliath. Just some things in the vicinity here of the River Liffey where we are. Behind me, if you can see, you'll see a white curved bridge. That is the halfpenny or halfpenny bridge. It's 200 years old. Its original name was Wellington Bridge, named after the Duke of Wellington. He was the Irish general who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and he gave his name to the bridge. They asked him could they use that, but people used to have to pay a halfpenny or halfpenny tax to cross it, and the nickname stuck, so that is now its official name. You might be able to see just there above my head, and you had to pay a halfpenny tax to cross it for 100 years. That mortgage was paid off in 1916. Nothing to do with our rebellion, just the time it was paid off. And nowadays Dublin couples put love locks, padlocks on top of it to symbolise their new union. So Dublin City Council, or our local municipal government, spends €35,000 every year snapping those locks off to make sure that the weight of the bridge doesn't force it to collapse. So I'm going to walk you through our fair city now. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have, and I will do my best to answer those every so often. Right. So the other name for our city, Dublin, much easier to pronounce, is also come from Irish Gaelic, and it's two words. Dove is black and Lane is pool, and it's named after a literal black pool that was formed by the Poddle River. The Poddle River is one of the tributaries of the River Liffey, whereas the Átha Cliath was a footbridge, and we know about that because it was written down in something called Annals, the Annals of Ulster, and they tell us this footbridge was done in 770 AD. 1250 years ago. These annals were annual accounts of events written down by monks, and monks back then in Ireland would have been the only literate people, the only people who could read and write, and they were making very early journals or newspapers. The second site was ecclesiastical, also by these monks. There were churches around this black pool just south of the current city, and this black pool was used as a dock by the Vikings when they founded Dublin in 841 AD. The Vikings were Scandinavian raiders, pirates, people from Norway and Denmark, and they came here. They were raiding the tremendous wealth of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was able to produce beautiful books, manuscripts, copies of the Bible, the Gospels, like the Book of Kells, and they would cover these with gold and silver and jewels, and they had bishops' croziers, recolaries. It was like a giant ATM, and the Vikings were here raiding the wealth of the Catholic Church, but they decided to stay. And they docked their boats on this black pool in Dublin, and they created a wooden palisade or ship encampment. What the annals tell us was a long fort in 841 AD, almost 1200 years ago. And historians regard that as the founding of the city of Dublin. And it's just easier to say. There's some good, nice, hard consonants in Dublin, whereas Baile Átha Cliath, it's far more vowels than that. Now, the Vikings have been stereotyped in history as rapers and pillagers. They certainly were that initially, but they were also innovators, and they brought in tremendous innovations in shipbuildings. Their clinker-built ships were the best that any civilization in Northern Europe could muster, and their low keel was suitable for raiding going inland. They also introduced innovations in house building. They gave us a huge amount of words in the English language we still use today: fish, anchor, boat, penny. So you can see what kind of things they were up to. And also, they were the first people in Ireland to mint currency. First time that coins were used in Ireland, it was Viking coins. And prior to that, cows were used by the native Gaelic Celts as a store of value and a unit of exchange. So the first coins minted in Dublin were by a king of Dublin called Sitrick Silkenbeard, because he was worth it. And Sitrick's penny was worth 1 glass of wine. So when we minted coins in Dublin, it was used as an accounting system for alcohol. Can't make this stuff up. So the Vikings had control of Dublin from about 841, and they had it right up until about 1169. Dublin was a Norse city. And what the Vikings really did for Dublin is they ended the isolation of Ireland. Ireland's on the northwest corner of Europe, as you know. After that, the next civilization really was Scotland or Iceland. And they involved us in their trading network, which went all over Northern Europe and even had tentacles down to Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul as well. And finished goods from here in Dublin went all over their trading network. They founded our coastal towns, not just Dublin, but places like Waterford, Wexford, Cork and Limerick as well. But they were replaced as the rulers of Dublin by the next wave of invaders, and these are the people who built this structure behind me, which doesn't look very much like a castle today, but this is Dublin Castle. And we can't go into it because of the corona apocalypse which is going on at the moment, but if we could, until yesterday, I could bring you in there and show you the remains of Dublin Castle, which is the oldest building in the city. And I'm waving back at you. And this was built by the Normans. The Normans were people of Viking descent. They were from Normandy in France. They became the ruling class of England, 1066, Battle of Hastings, and they were invited into Ireland from 1169 onwards. Ireland was primarily a Gaelic or Celtic society, and there was 5 provinces here. Where Dublin is Leinster, the eastern province. And the king of Leinster was a guy called Dermot MacMurrough. And Dermot had an affair with another king's wife. And this gave the High King, Rory O'Connor, it was all like Game of Thrones, the excuse to invade Dublin and Leinster and kick Dermot out, which he did. Dermot went over to England, which had run by the Normans, the best soldiers in Europe. They had superior chainmail, steel swords. They had the longbow, which they invented, and the crossbow. So he met a down-on-his-luck knight named Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare, who's thankfully known by his nickname, Strongbow. He's got a cider named after him, and Strongbow said, yeah, I will absolutely help you retake your kingdom. Here's the deal. When you pass away, I'm the king of Dublin and Leinster. And their invasion was very, very successful. So they took the town of Dublin in 1169. They displaced the Vikings, and they were now in control. And this is the start of Ireland's rocky relationship with our neighbours across the water, with England. And this is the start of Norman rule here. So that's 1169 onwards, just over 800 years ago. The Normans introduced a lot of innovations to Ireland: the longbow, the crossbow. They had better agricultural equipment, the trowel and the for tilling. So the agriculture of the economy increased. Also, they chopped down many of the forests of the land, and they built stone castles all over Ireland. These stone castles commanded the landscape, and they let the locals, the Gaelic Irish, know that there was a new ruling class in town as well. It involved us directly in the affairs of English politics for about the next 750 years, and it's primarily the reason that Irish people speak English as opposed to our own language, which is Irish or Gaelic. And Dublin became a colonial English capital. So it was the capital of its own kingdom, the Kingdom of Ireland. Now, the first Englishman to call himself the King of Ireland was Henry VIII of England in 1542, he of the 6 wives. And this remained the Kingdom of Ireland from 1542 onwards. And it became an English colonial capital. And many of our buildings today, the majority of them, including the one behind me, this is City Hall, this is our main municipal building, were built to reflect Dublin's position as the capital city. of the Kingdom of Ireland, and it remained as such right up until 1800, until we had a rebellion which took our Parliament away and we were unified into Britain. But I'll talk more about that in a second. So the Normans ran our city, and we're our melting pot of people. The Vikings I mentioned previously, Viking surnames you would find in Ireland would be Tully, Doyle, Reynolds, Higgins, Loughlin, many of others. They eventually married the local Gaelic Irish people, and then we get surnames like McLaughlin. Mac is Irish for son of the Norwegian. McKeever, son of Ivor, son of Olaf, McAuliffe, and so on and so forth. So a melting pot of these peoples. The Norman names that came in the 12th century with anything like a Fitz and a De. So Fitzwilliam, Fitzmaurice, Fitzpatrick, Fitzpatrick, son of Patrick, and Darcy, Dalton, and so on and so forth. So the Irish are a melting pot of a variety of peoples, and Dublin remained a Norman capital today. So we're just strolling along Dame Street now, and all of our streets here in Dublin and throughout Ireland have road signs on them. I'll show you one in a while. And all of our road signs are in English and Irish. Dublin was a colonial capital, Viking and then Norman and then English. So English has always been spoken here as well, but the majority of people outside of Dublin would have spoken Irish or Gaelic until about 200 years ago. The game changer would have been the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. After that, Irish people found the need to emigrate, and you could only speak Irish in Ireland, whereas English could be spoken in 25% of the world, the British Empire at that time. So from then onwards we began a steep decline in our own native language. Now most Irish people cannot speak the language anymore. We do it in school. It's compulsory right up until 18 years of age. High school, secondary school. It is still spoken on the far west coast of the country in areas called the Gaeltacht, but most people in Dublin, we can't speak it. It's something we do in school. Once our exams are done, we generally don't speak it again. But our road signs would be in Irish and English. We also have our laws written in Irish and English as well. Any of our first names are Irish or Gaelic, and our surnames would be Gaelic as well. So we're walking down Dame Street. Dame Street is one of the main municipal streets here in the city, and it links Dublin Castle, where we were, right up to Trinity College, which I'll show you guys in just a way. And Dame Street is a mispronunciation of Dam Street, and there was a literal dam here. The River Liffey, which I showed you previously, came right up to here until about the 1600s. And one of the families who lived on Dame Street were called the Temple family, Temple. And they petitioned the city council. They said, we'd like to buy the floodplain of the River Liffey. And the city council sniggered at them, thought they were insane. But the Temple family were onto something. They reclaimed the land. They filled in all of this land, which was the empty floodplain of the River Liffey, and they raised the bar. The bar is an area of land under the water, and this area became known as Temple's Bar, and that's the area we've entered into right now. Temple Bar, and it was a genius move, because this is the area around Dublin Castle, the administrative head of the country, Trinity College, the old Irish Parliament, which I'll show you in a moment. So this became the playground for the wealthy of Dublin in the 16 and 1700s. So businesses we have a record of here would be whiskey bonders, wine importers, wig makers, things that only wealthy people would need or could afford. But the big game changer for Dublin was the Act of Union of 1801. This was the union of the two kingdoms. It was the abolition of the Irish Parliament and its unification with Great Britain, creating the United Kingdom. After that, Irish parliamentarians and the wealthy of Dublin had to move to London to go to the Parliament, and they took their businesses with them. Temple Bar needed new patrons. What did it have? A river. What's a river got? Sailors. And what do sailors want? Wine and women. Temple Bar became the playground, the party town of Dublin. And that was the case right up until about the 1970s, till they were honestly discussing knocking down all of the old buildings in this area. And they were discussing making it into the bus depot, the central transport hub of Dublin. Now, thankfully, that didn't happen. There were protests at that time because of the history of the site, and a Prime Minister decided to save it. So tax incentives went in here for restaurants, for bars, performance theatres, bookshops, and Temple Bar became the cultural hipster part of Dublin. And what you really saw here was a lot of busking, people playing music for free in their guitar cases trying to get a few tips. And this is recorded on the wall here behind me. This is the Temple Bar Wall of Fame. So this shows you all the Irish acts who have bussed or played music here in Temple Bar. Now you will recognise some of them. The most famous ones are there behind me. This is the most famous band to come out of Dublin. This is U2. These are 4 guys from Dublin. How you doing? So this is Van Morrison. He's not from Dublin, he's from Belfast, but he did live here in Dublin for a while. Okay, so these are all the people, some other people you might know as well. And these acts have played music here in Temple Bar as youngsters, and they've gone on to various levels of Irish and international stardom. This is Shane MacGowan here, lead singer of the Pogues. He's still alive, he's like the Irish Keith Richards. And we also have other people above me as well, including Luke Kelly of the Dubliners and Sinead O'Connor as well. So Temple Bar kind of got a refit, and it became the hipster cultural area of Dublin. But really from the late 1980s onwards, it became kind of Dublin's really party town again once more. Now, most Dubliners ourselves, we don't really come into Temple Bar. There are restaurants in here which are very, very good, but in terms of pubs, we wouldn't really come into Temple Bar at all. We think it's touristy, and as a result of that, it can be overpriced. A pint of beer in Dublin will cost you about €6. Outside of Dublin, it's slightly less than that. Wine would be about the same. If you come into certain parts of the Temple Bar area, you're going to be paying 8 or 9, maybe even €10 for a pint of beer. We won't do that. Now, as I mentioned, bar in this case means an area of reclaimed land. Irish people don't call a bar, we call it a pub. And there's 2 sections of a pub. There's the lounge, comfy place with couches, and then there is the bar, which is the area where all the grumpy old men kind of don't talk to each other and watch sports. But there is one establishment in Temple Bar which plays on the confusion, and it's behind me, and they use the definite article the Temple Bar. Now, it's a very beautifully presented bar. It's got lots of flowers on it, and when we're not in the middle of the corona apocalypse, you have lots of people outside it. And because of this confusion, we're in Ireland, we're in Dublin, that's the capital. Irish people like drinking. We're going to go to the Temple Bar. This is the most successful bar on the whole island. It's the most successful bar. And it's just the confusion. Irish people wouldn't really go in there, particularly from Dublin itself. Now, we have 800 pubs in Dublin, 800. And the population of the city is 1.6 million. So that's one pub for every 2,000 people. And on Friday and Saturday nights, we do try and pack those things out as well. So during the day, usually when we're walking through here, you'll hear people busking, playing for music. You'll have shoppers going around the place, people going for food or something to eat or drink. There are restrictions that have come into effect here in Dublin and Ireland because of the corona pandemic. We had new regulations announced last night by our Prime Minister, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, which in essence means you really can't do anything you'd like to at all. The pubs closed about 2 weeks ago. Any restaurants are really shut down at this period of time now. Pharmacies, chemists are certainly open, as are supermarkets. You can leave your house to go for a jog or go for a run, but you cannot go more than 2 kilometres unless you're getting essential services like food or medicines. So I wouldn't use the term lockdown, but we're as close as possible as a lockdown as we can be. Now, Ireland's a very peaceful country, and the Irish Republic is a population of 5 million people, but we only have 14,000 police for the whole country, so it wouldn't be possible to go under lockdown as such. But still, as much as possible, the streets are empty, as you can see behind me. Just going to see if you guys have any questions. Fabulous tour guide, you're very welcome, thank you. So guys, so Norman Rule really brought us into the English sphere of influence. The city developed. Henry VIII, as I mentioned, first man to call himself King of Ireland, first Englishman to do so. That's 1542, and then we become our own kingdom. And the old medieval city that the Normans had built in the 12th, 13th century, that was crumbling. So people started to really rebuild it in the 16 and 1700s, particularly going into the Georgian period. Now, the Georgian period is the period between the 1730s and the 1830s, when you had 4 King Georges in a row on the throne. And the city of Dublin was entirely rebuilt in this period of time. And you can see this in the Georgian architecture in the city, which I'll show you in a moment. And at this period of time, the increasing economy of Dublin, the beautiful Georgian squares, things like our Parliament, which we'll see, Trinity College, Dublin earns the name the second city of the British Empire. So while some places like the United States were declaring independence from Britain, Britain was rebuilding Dublin, and it became very, very famous indeed. The economy of the city improved dramatically in the late 1770s, and this is when Temple Bar was the playground for the wealthy, and now it's a playground for everybody. Going to see if you guys have questions. Yeah. So we're pretty empty. This is the emptiest that I've ever seen Dublin. It's usually a busy city. The population of the city itself, 1.6 million. Inside the city limits, 1.2 million. Now, it's a very peaceful city. The crime rate is extremely low. It's very safe. I'm in my late 30s. I've never been mugged. I don't know anybody who has. Temple Bar is pedestrianised. It has been pedestrianised over the last 30 years. So if we were walking here during the day, there'd be a lot more people. But there's no cars allowed in here beyond 11 o'clock in the morning unless they're deliveries. So pedestrians halfway as well. There are 4 pedestrianised areas in Dublin. We have 2 shopping streets. Henry Street on the north side, Grafton Street on the south side, Temple Bar, this area here, and Trinity College is also pedestrianised. So no cars outside of security services would be allowed in there. But it is very, very quiet. We're heading back onto Dame Street, where the Temple family used to live, where the dam was. This is our bus service behind me there, still running. This is Dublin Bus. It is owned by the Irish government. It's a public service, and it does a huge workload at peak times. It would ferry 600,000 people around the city of Dublin on a day-to-day basis. That's a third of the population would use public transport. We also have the Luas light rail system, LUAS. We might see that in a while, and that comes from the Irish for speed. Or Luas Losrock, the speed of light. Most Dubliners call it the snail on the rail, or the Daniel Day. So we had 2 lines, and now we have 3. They've expanded. You'd have a huge amount of cyclists in the city of Dublin as well. I live in the suburbs, I walk in and out of town. Dublin was really designed again in this Georgian period, the 1700s, and the width of the streets would be for an aristocrat and a horse and cart going by. The modern day of massive public transport and everybody having a car was not envisioned. So I'm going to swing around. I'm going to show you this building here behind me. This is an example of neoclassical architecture. These beautiful arches here. This is the old Irish Parliament. This is the Parliament of the Kingdom of Ireland. And this building took 4 years to do, 1729 to 1733. The architect was an Englishman. His name was Edward Lovett Pierce. He also had the assistance of Richard Casals, a German architect, and he did some additions to it. So this was the House of Commons and the House of Lords of the Kingdom of Ireland. So they finished the building in 1733, and these people ran this island. The whole island was ran from right here in Dublin right up until 1800. House of Lords inside, 147 ennobled hereditary peers, so earls, dukes passing on the title to eldest son, and then you had a House of Commons, 300 members in that. It's an interesting use of the term commons. Because of the law at the time, you needed property to vote, so only the top 1% of people could sit in here as well. Women did not have the right to vote or to sit in Parliament until 1918, so they couldn't be in here. And also we had a series of laws which ran in Britain and Ireland called the penal laws, and you had to be an Episcopalian, a member of the Church of England, the state church. Now 80% of the Irish population would have been Roman Catholic, and this was a mark of their national identity. To be Irish was to be Catholic as far as they were concerned. They did not want to convert to the Anglican Church, and if you did not want to convert, you could not sit in here. So it was only wealthy Anglican men, the 1% of the 1%, that could sit in here. Now, this building only functioned as a parliament for 70 years, and that's because we had our biggest rebellion in our history in 1798. This was the rebellion of the United Irishmen, and these men, people from Catholic and Protestant backgrounds, they wanted to abolish these penal laws which discriminated against non-Anglicans, non-Episcopalian, and they wanted to create an independent Irish republic where your religion would be your own business. And they rose up in 1798. Their leader was a guy called Wolfe Tone, Theobald Wolfe Tone. He was a lawyer from Dublin, and we got some sunshine here in Dublin, it's not bad, and he wanted to abolish these laws, and he enlisted the French, who Britain was at war with at that time. He got weapons, but unfortunately the French did not land properly because of our stormy weather here. It's usually quite calm, but they had bad luck in 1798, and the landing did not take place as they wanted. But they did rise up in 1798, 30,000 men, mostly here on the east coast, here in Dublin, Wexford south of here, and Antrim to the north of the country as well. They rose up. The British brought in over 100,000 troops, and they quashed the rebellion. And after that, the Prime Minister at the time, William Pitt the Younger, said, "There's no way you guys are keeping this Parliament here. I got to watch you Irish. You're rebellious." So they went ahead with the Act of Union, and they unified the two kingdoms. The Kingdom of Ireland was abolished, and the Kingdom of Britain merged with us into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And that was the case from 1801 onwards. So now Irish parliamentarians would have to travel to Britain for representation. Just right across the road, taking a break from politics, guys, is one of the most famous buildings in the city of Dublin. This is Trinity College, Dublin. It's right opposite the old Irish Parliament. Now, this is the oldest university, there's Dublin Bus again, in the city of Dublin, the oldest university on the island. It goes back to 1592, and this was founded by QE1, Queen Elizabeth I. And this is again referring to these penal laws. This was only for Irish Episcopalians, members of the Church of England, so the top 10% of the country. Britain had gone through the Reformation, the English Reformation England had in the 1530s, and Ireland, again for nationalistic reasons, hadn't really adopted that. They wished to remain Roman Catholic. There isn't a great difference between a Roman Catholic and someone of Episcopalian or Anglican belief system, so it was to do with politics more so than it was to do with religious beliefs. So when this was set up in 1592, Roman Catholics were banned from going here, as were Presbyterians, the other religious denomination. They couldn't go here, and that was the case right up until 1793, 200 years. Where out of historical spite, the Catholic Church banned their own flock from going here until 1973, 50 years ago. They went anyway. Nowadays, most Irish people do not care about religion at all. It's considered something that's a private matter, and anybody can go to Trinity College. It's our most famous university. It's no longer the largest, it's the third largest. 16,000 students would go there, and they study everything. And now normally I could walk you through the campus, but because of the corona, the campus has been closed at the moment. So that's Trinity College, Dublin. The most famous Irish writer is a Dubliner, James Joyce, and he lived 100 years ago. He died just before the Second World War, and he's considered Ireland's greatest writer, particularly by people who haven't read him. We have to do him in school. I actually like him, and he famously described Trinity College students as being like fine Irish cream. They're rich and thick, but I think he was a bit jealous. He went to UCD where I went, the rival college, so a bit of jealousy there. So we're now heading down Westmoreland Street. We're going to cross over from the south side of Dublin, which is the historical centre, over to the north side of the city. The reason the south side was occupied from the Vikings, the Normans, the English onwards, is it had initially it had hills, and it's much easier to defend running down a hill than going up it. So this was part of the Viking mentality. And when the Normans came in, they took over the Viking possessions and built their own cities, stone castles, and then the English came in and they developed the city as well. Crossing from the south side of the city to the north side of the city, cut in half by the River Liffey. This is part of what unfortunately is the Dublin class divide. This separates the Northsiders from the Southsiders. This is the big rivalry here in the city of Dublin. This is social class. Social class no longer has anything to do with money in the city of Dublin. It's primarily just accent and attitudes. So the most famous person from Dublin from a working class background would be Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter, you may know him. And the most famous person from a middle class background in Dublin would probably be the lads from U2, Bono. So that would be the big divide. Now, most working class and middle class people, they live in different suburbs, they read different newspapers, they have different educational levels, they have different accents, and unfortunately they don't mix. They tend not to date each other, they tend not to marry each other. This class divide in Dublin would decide things like house prices, what newspaper you read, even down to what beer you drink, the kind of jobs you would do. But it hasn't got to do with money anymore. Now, most of it is friendly rivalry, taking the piss, but some people take it very, very seriously. Television programs are made about it, both documentaries and drama series. Books are written about it, newspaper articles are written about it, and even people who aren't from Dublin, be they from the outside of Ireland, outside of Dublin, in the rest of Ireland, rural areas, and even people from Northern Ireland under British rule, they would know about the class divide in Dublin as well. So we're crossing over the River Liffey. Liffey was the name of a Celtic river goddess. Wasn't the original name for the river. The original name for the river was Rurhoch, which is Irish, and it means tempestuous or liable to flood. And it's a tidal river. And the River Liffey was 3 times the width that it is today. There it is again, we're going to cross over it again. And it was very, very slowly filled in by the citizens of Dublin over a period of time. And 200 years ago, from 1794 right up until 1820, we had the embankments on the River Liffey built to stop it flooding. And we call these the quays, Quays. And they substantively did stop it flooding. So we've had no major floods since then. So crossing over into the north side of the city. In the 1700s, the initial Georgian period, the north side of the city was actually quite fashionable. It was the cool part of town, it was the hipster part of town. And that was the case right up until when a nobleman named the Duke of Leinster built a big mansion back on the south side of the city. And he was so popular and he threw these massive parties that he kind of made it the cool part of town again. So parts of town become cool and then they become uncool with fashion as things go on. Now, Duke of Leinster's house was eventually taken over by the Irish Parliament, Dáil Éireann, so our Prime Minister is in residence, and that has been the headquarters of the Irish government since 1922. Just going to see if you guys have questions here. It is a bit windy, yeah, and it's a beautiful day. We do have good weather. One of the stereotypes about Ireland is that it rains the whole time. It doesn't. It rains a lot in January and February. It doesn't rain now. And late March things start to get warm. It's about 9 degrees Celsius now. And it is a bit windy, but it's turning into a nice day. So we were merged into the Kingdom of Britain, the United Kingdom, in 1801. And from that created nationalists and unionists, people who wish to maintain that union, generally those of British descent in the north of the country. And then we also had Irish nationalists. Those people wanted the return of the Parliament to Dublin. They wanted some measure of home rule. Now, the majority of the nationalist movement would have been happy with that home rule, just the return of the Parliament I showed you. They wouldn't have minded if the King of England was the King of Ireland or if Britain looked after external affairs. But not everybody agreed. There was a small group of people in Ireland that might have represented maybe 2% of the people, and they were Republicans. They wanted a completely independent Irish Republic. This is the Lewis going by me there. This is the Daniel Day, the snail on the rail, one of our major transport systems in the city. And these Republicans staged a rebellion 100 years ago in 1916, and it began a rocky road to independence. When they staged the rebellion, it was the First World War, and 200,000 Irish people were fighting for the British Army. And the war effort was popular. Everybody knew somebody fighting in it. So when they staged this rebellion in 1916, it was not initially popular. And these guys had no mandate. They had no popular desire. None of them were members of parliament or city aldermen. They took it upon themselves to do it. The average person who took part in the rebellion was a teacher. That's what teaching will do to you. And the leader of the rebellion was a man named Patrick Pearse, and he was a poet in the Irish language and also in English, and he led the rebellion. So 2,300 revolutionaries took over the key buildings in Dublin, and they staged the rebellion, the Easter Rebellion, on Easter Monday, the 24th of April 1916. And they chose the date of Easter because it was a public holiday, most people would be available, and also the idea of resurrection. Just as Jesus had risen up, they wanted Ireland to rise up. You see the key buildings in Dublin. They wrote the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, a visionary document, which is one of the founding documents of the Irish state, and they declared Ireland an independent republic unilaterally. Now, when they did this Easter Monday, it was a public holiday, so most of the British security forces, they were at the horse races. So the revolutionaries, by and large, had the city to themselves for about 2 days until the British authorities summoned all the police officers and army back into the city, and then the Republicans would engage the British Army for 6.5 days. And just behind me, this, basking in the sunlight, this is the headquarters of the 1916 Rising. This is the General Post Office, or the GPO. Now, the building itself is 200 years old, 1818. It was the headquarters of the British Post Office. And once we got independence in 1922, it became the headquarters of the Irish Post Office. And the reason the revolutionaries chose this as the headquarters for the rebellion in 1916 is this is smack bang in the middle of Dublin. Everybody had been inside it, everybody could read and write. They never took Trinity College, which I showed you, for example. At that time, only wealthy people would have gone to Trinity College, whereas everybody had been inside here. You also had 4-foot thick granite walls, and you had a massive communication network inside. You had public telephones, and you also had telegraph machines. So it was like taking over a TV studio. So this was the headquarters of operations for the rebellion. They held out here. After seizing the building at 12 noon Easter Monday, they held out here until Friday afternoon. In response, the British sent in troops into Dublin. Martial law was declared, and a gunboat called the Helga was sailed up the River Liffey, which I showed you earlier on. They found the range of the GPO by Thursday evening, and they started hitting the roof of the building. So they had to evacuate it the next day on Friday afternoon. They would surrender on Saturday afternoon here, the headquarters command, and then the rebels in the other parts of Dublin would then accept that surrender order on Sunday. So it was about 6.5 days of a rebellion, and this was not popular. The British had shelled the place. They caused buildings to be completely demolished, and these guys had taken it upon themselves to stage a rebellion in the First World War. They had no mandate, so this was not a very popular rebellion at all. What changed it and made it popular was the reaction for the British. They imposed martial law. They arrested the leaders of the rebellion, and they began executions in May. So the top 14 commanders of the rebellion were executed and into martyrs. So it also lent a whole element of Greek tragedy to the rebellion, because Patrick Pearse, the leader of the rebellion, who was from Dublin, he wrote poetry as well in prison. So 2 years later, the political party associated with the rebellion, Sinn Féin, which means ourselves in Irish Gaelic, they landslided the next general election. They won 75% of the vote, and they were not going to send their members of parliament to London. Instead, they took matters into their own hands. They met in Dublin, and they declared an independent Irish republic, echoing the republic declared in 1916. Britain took this very, very seriously. It had the legitimacy of an elected parliament. This would begin a 2-year war of independence from 1919 to 1921, and this is where Michael Collins becomes famous. He was the director of intelligence for the old Irish Republican Army, what the Army of the Rebellion now called itself. They engaged the British for 2 years, and they did very, very, very well, despite the fact that it was guerrilla warfare. They did not have the economy, and they don't have the amount of weapons that the British did. They fought them pretty much to a standstill. There were negotiations at the end of 1921, and a treaty was proposed between Great Britain and Southern Ireland. The north of the country, which had a huge amount of British people living in there since the 1600s, the plantation of Ulster, indicated their wish to remain part of Britain and to be governed directly from London. So this created partition. The 6 counties of the north would remain part of Britain, whereas the 26 counties would form an Irish Free State. Now, when this treaty was brought back to Dublin for the Republican Parliament to vote on, they weren't happy about it, and it split them right down the middle. They took a vote on it, and it passed the compromise. 53% in favour, 47% against. So it was very, very narrow. Those people who voted in favour of the treaty said it was the best deal on the table, and if they kept fighting the British, ultimately they would lose and they would be in an inferior negotiating position, so they might get an even worse deal in future. Those people who voted against it said this was a betrayal of what people had fought for in 1916, and it was also a betrayal of what people had voted for in the general election of 1918. So a civil war broke out between people who had been friends and who had fought on the same side. So this lasted for 1 year, the Irish Civil War, 1922 to 1923. And it was actually more vicious than the War of Independence against Britain, which had preceded it for 2 years. So previous comrades, previous friends fought, and 3,000 people were killed in the Irish Civil War, which is more that the Irish Republicans had killed when they were unified against British rule previously, 1923. The Civil War, the pro-treaty side, those in favour of the compromise, Michael Collins' side won. He himself would be assassinated in the Irish Civil War in his own native county of Cork. He was the first, most famous major casualty of that Civil War. The anti-treaty side was outnumbered and outgunned, so they decided to accept the new state. They buried their weapons and they entered democratic politics. The leader of the anti-treaty side was a guy called Eamon de Valera. He was born in New York. He was of Irish parentage, and he would become the Prime Minister of the Irish Free State on 8 occasions and President of the country twice. And he would very, very slowly dismantle the remaining British apparatus of the Irish Free State, such as having a Governor General like Canada. So the Irish Free State decided to leave the British Empire totally in 1949, and we declared ourselves the Republic of Ireland. We came out of the Commonwealth totally, and with that we were entirely independent of Britain. So they had come here in 1169, invited in, and they had left entirely by 1949. So it's 750 years of British rule, and the enduring hangover is Irish people really no longer speak our own language. We speak English on a day-to-day basis. That's been a huge economic benefit to us. Ireland decided to join the European Union, the EEC, in 1973, and this is now called the European Union. This brought huge changes to the city of Dublin. Huge structural funds came into us, and Dublin went from being the capital city of Ireland into a modern European capital. And Dublin started to administer these structural funds all over Ireland. It went from being the poorest country in Western Europe to the 14th wealthiest country in the world. This was also facilitated by us dropping our corporate tax rate in the 1990s from 40% down to 12.5%. And as a result of this, a huge amount of money came into Ireland, and Ireland became a tech hub. So the major contributors to the Irish economy would be Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. They're all headquartered here in Dublin, and this is facilitated by an Irish Financial Services. Just behind me you can see something we built as a result of all this money coming in, the tech money coming in. The period 1997 to 2007 we call the Celtic Tiger economy, and it's a big thing sticking up behind me. This is in fact the tallest sculpture in the world. This is the spire. Its official name is the Millennium Monument of Light. The millennium, as you guys know, is the year 2000. But with Irish government efficiency, the spire was finished in 2003, just 3 years late. Projected cost was €8 million. It ended up costing 15. It is 400 feet high, 127 meters. Whatever it does, it's doing it right now. There's a light on top of it, so airplanes can see that when they're coming into Dublin and get their bearings if they need to. It's stainless steel, so you can put it in the dishwasher. Now, Dubliners, here's the GPO again, would have a very cheeky sense of humour, so we would give things nicknames. So people call it the spike, the pin in the bin, Stiletto in the Ghetto, and it has other blue names as well, like the erection at the intersection. Dubliners have a cheeky sense of humour. So I'm going to see if you guys have questions here. How tall? 400 feet, tallest sculpture in the world. It qualifies as a sculpture. So it was made down in Wexford, south of here. It goes all the way up. So there it is. So guys, I have given you a very brief introduction to the city of Dublin. Dublin's a great city. If you are visiting here in future, I'd recommend you spend about 2-3 days here, as well as the political history of the country. We have great museums. All of our state museums are free. Archaeology, painting, huge amount of stuff dug up from Celtic times onwards, from the Norman times and the Viking times. Lots of great stuff from Irish artists like Jack Butler Yeats. He was the brother of William Butler Yeats. This is a great literary city. Huge amount of writings from William Butler Yeats to James Joyce to Oscar Wilde. It's a very peaceful city. It's a very safe city. It's got great food. It's got over 800 pubs. It's got great local music as well. And usually the weather is very, very good. And anybody who comes here to Dublin, you are very, very welcome. I'm going to see if you guys have any questions before I end it. Okay, so I'm going to end there. So this is Dara McCarthy signing off for Travel Curious. It's been a pleasure bringing you around my city and giving you a snapshot of the capital of the Irish Republic. And I hope once this corona business is over, as soon as possible, that we're all well and we're all in a position to keep on travelling. So guys, keep on travelling.